don't put too much stress on your first kiss. It'll happen, but like it gets better, more funnier, and like
Yeah. And it only gets magical if you're actually in love with the person, like later on after you've kissed them a lot. But usually the first kiss.
True. I prefer women, but I want a guy to force himself on me. I am open to trans women doing the same, but I don't see too many of them wanting. Oh, some of them do like work off the side because like some of them are actually sex workers. So like there's never a shortage for someone to take a nice 40-year-old hairy man aside and take him. just really take him.
Is one last kiss, but she won't let me have it. I want to get over her, but I can't. I need help. Hey, this is Morgan Rector. Join me and my co-host Rosanna Chilton for the Confession Post podcast. ConfessionPost.com is a website where users post highly personal content anonymously for the reading pleasure of other users. On this podcast, Rosanna and I read confessions from the site and give our analysis. You can listen to the Confession Post podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Rachel Telfor.
And I'm Michelle Gower.
We are the hosts of a new true crime podcast.
It is called Children of the Void.
The Void refers to children who are missing.
And children who have died under mysterious and suspicious circumstances.
Sometimes parents know nothing about what has happened to their child.
And sometimes they seem to know more than they let on.
Like Casey Anthony.
And the John Benet Ramsey case.
We are determined to do our part to find missing children.
And the truth when the story of their disappearance doesn't hold up.
Together, we will blast the shadows with light so that no more children disappear into the void.
Children of the Void debuts in September.
Join us so we can all make a difference.
Please subscribe.
Until then, I'm Rachel Telfor.
And I'm Michelle Gower.
You can catch Children of the Void on Apple, Spotify, YouTube,
and everywhere else you get your podcasts.
Hey y'all, Morgan Rector here. Do you have an idea for a podcast? Furthermore, would you like to host and co-produce your own podcast? I am always looking to expand the portfolio of my company, Leader One Podcast Network. If you would like to have your own show, send me an email and we can talk about it. Aside from politics and religion, I'm open to just about any topic. If you are passionate, knowledgeable, and articulate, I want to talk to you. You can contact me by email, morgansvariety@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you soon. Hey, Morgan Rector here. I'm just dropping a line to say thank you to all of my Patreon donors. Since I'm not a Joe Rogan or Mark Maron, podcasting is more or less a starving artist gig for guys like me. Patreon donations keep me from having to take a job that would take away from my ability to generate more Human Monsters content. The website URL for Patreon is www.patreon, that's spelled patreon.com/leader, O-N-E, Leader One. A way to make a one-time donation is to send it through PayPal at Morgan Rector 331, Rector spelled R-E-C-T-O-R, at hotmail.com, Morgan Rector 331 at hotmail.com. You don't have to give a large amount of money if it isn't possible. If $1 a month or $1 one time is the best you can pony up, it would be gratefully accepted. I know how hard things are for everybody during COVID. Thank you for all the support you have given the show, whether it is through financial donations or simply by listening. I am grateful for all you have given to me and the program. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Human Monsters. One common denominator among dysfunctional families is the tendency to keep secrets. Except for when it comes to things like surprise parties and the unexpected joys of unannounced reunions, secrets are seldom kept for good reasons. This is especially true when the truth about one's family would be expected to invite shame, derision, and shock from the community at large. The number one tool utilized by abusers is isolation. Lee Sexton kept the outside world in the dark about what he did to his children. He knew that outsiders with a sense of decency would be appalled at what was going on. This is that story. Please note that though this story is true, most of the principals are identified by pseudonyms. Part 1. Picking the Locks to the Gates of Hell. Stark County, Ohio. A girl named Terry Torrifi noticed a girl in her high school who held aloof to the student body. The girl always looked like she didn't get enough sleep. Her hair was never washed. She wore outdated, hand-me-down clothing. It seemed as though something just wasn't right about the girl's private life. Whatever it wasn't the sort of thing that would be obvious to outsiders, except that one couldn't help but assume that a neglectful parent could be to blame. Terry felt sorry for the girl, since it appeared that she had no friends. That was one problem she could solve for the girl. She went up to her in study hall one day and introduced herself. She asked the girl for her name. She said, Stella Sexton. Stella Sexton was not easy to get to know. Terry would ask her questions, and most of Stella's answers were monosyllables, with yes and no as the most common. There was an invisible wall around Stella, but Terry was determined to bulldoze through it. After some stilted dialogue, Stella finally began communicating in complete sentences. She told Terry she was born and raised in Canton. She also mentioned that she was part Native American. Terry was fascinated by Native American culture. Stella named the tribe. Terry had never heard of it. She asked her if she spoke any of the languages. Stella opened her notebook and wrote Terry's name in the tribe's language. She told her that her father taught her the language. He had some involvement with Native American tribes. He restored aging and damaged furniture for some affiliated organizations. Stella said that was how he earned a living. She gave the sheet from the notebook to Terry as a keepsake. The next day, Stella gave her a sheet that contained the entire alphabet of that language. Stella: We speak the language at home. Terry: Hey, maybe I could come over to your house sometime. I'm really into this stuff. Stella: No, absolutely not. Terry: What do you mean, absolutely? Stella: I can't do that. My dad would not approve. Terry: Why? Stella: He'd be real mad if he even knew I was telling you. The girls continued to meet at school, but Stella continued to throw roadblocks at Terry's feet as she tried to establish a deeper foundation of intimacy in their friendship. What Terry didn't understand was that Stella's house was a prison. The time Stella spent at school, along with the commutes that took her there, were like day parole. When school was not in session, she had a curfew and her movements were closely monitored. In the days when children were not required by law to attend school, she would likely have never ventured outdoors without the accompaniment of her father. Stella would invite Terry to the typical kinds of outings that teenagers enjoy. No dice. Terry: "Hey Stella, want to catch a movie?" Stella: "No." Terry: "We could go to Canton Center Mall." Stella: "No." Terry: "How about Belden Village?" Stella: "No." Terry wondered if Stella's family were indigent. Perhaps she turned down her invitations because she was insecure about being devoid of pocket money. Terry: "All right then, how about you just come over to my place?" Stella: "No." Stella went into the usual litany about how she couldn't do anything with Terry because her father would not approve. It was for that reason that Terry and Stella did not remain in contact throughout summer vacation. They resumed their friendship in their senior year. Terry found Stella sitting alone in the cafeteria of their high school. She sat at a table located close to the door. She was beaming this time. She appeared to be sleeping better. There was another striking difference in Stella's appearance: a bulge in her stomach. Stella hadn't gained weight elsewhere in her body. It looked more like a baby bump. Terry asked if that was the case. She assumed correctly. Stella's baby was due in October. Teen pregnancy for most girls is a personal tragedy. It presents unsettling moral dilemmas and difficult decisions. None of that applied to Stella. She anticipated the birth of her child with pride. Terry surmised that it would consolidate the social isolation Stella experienced in their school. Even in these modern times, pregnant teenagers invite derision from their alumni. It didn't concern Stella, however. Terry recalled years later that Stella had the typical glow of expecting mothers who look forward to the birth of their child. Terry pulled up a chair. When a girl's pregnant while still a teenager in high school, people have questions. Terry: "Gosh, Stella, who's the father?" Stella: "He's in the Navy." Terry: "Where?" Stella: "Overseas." Terry: "Are you getting married?" Stella: "I think so." Terry: "My God, Stella, what do your parents think?" Stella: "They don't care." Terry was stunned. Terry: "They don't care? My parents would kill me." Stella: "As long as I'm happy, they don't care." Terry found that strange, considering that Stella wasn't allowed out of the house except to go to school. Parents like that are usually extremely intense about the plight of their children. How could they not be outraged or distressed? As Terry secretly did the math, she realized it didn't add up. Unbeknownst to Terry later on, Stella was allowed to attend her prom, but she was not permitted to party afterwards, as attendees typically do. Her father and brother would pick her up as soon as the event ended. She would not wear the corsage her date bought for her. Her father bought one for her, and that was the one she was to wear. No substitutions. Stella's date to the prom was a boy named Joel. He tried to hold her hand, but she would touch it lightly for a few seconds and then pull hers away. She said very little to him that night. The other kids Stella knew outside of her home didn't know her very well. What they did know was that she was held back a year in elementary school. She repeated grade 1 because she was injured in a cooking accident at home. She spent 2 months in the hospital. Her arms and chest were burned by searing hot grease. She studied culinary arts in high school, but dropped out to work in restaurants. When asked about her father's career, she told them he owned a painting business. Estella Mae Sexton was the oldest of 5 girls in a family of 12 children. Her family's nickname for her was Pixie. She would later claim that the father of her baby was deceased. After the prom, Joel decided to ask Stella out again. After taking her out once, he began visiting her at her family's home. He told friends that all he did there was sit around with Stella and her relatives and talk. That, and they watched television. A rumor about the Sexton family spread throughout the neighborhood. Some said they belonged to a cult. They practiced strange rituals, and the boys came to school looking like they had been assaulted. Joel was in love with Stella. He announced one day that he wanted to move to Montana. Montana was the location where the Sexton family planned to buy a large ranch. It came complete with a guest house and a guard station. Joel was invited to work in the guard station. Joel was in the care of his Aunt Teresa. One day she drove them to the Sexton's house. A man who introduced himself as Stella's father, Eddie Lee Sexton, met them at the front door. Teresa told him she needed to talk about Joel. Ed smiled and invited her to sit on the deck. His wife Estella came out of the house. He turned to her and said, "Go inside and get some iced tea." She was a compliant wife, and she did what she was told. One by one, the rest of the Sexton children came out of the house. They were silent and mostly looked down at the ground. Stella, Joel, and the other kids took a walk to the family's pond. Teresa and Ed talked for a while. At one point, he began to talk about how his children bore markings on their hands. He explained that these markings portended future events and aspects of their fate. This led Teresa to believe that maybe the rumors about the family being involved with a cult could be true. Joel did not move to Montana to be with Stella and her family. Stella had broken up with him. That all changed after the Sexton family's deal to buy the ranch fell through. Joel and Pixie were dating again. He once invited her to see his apartment, but Ed forbade it. Pixie now had 2 children. She claimed the father was the man who was in the military. The same man she claimed was dead. Joel was slightly developmentally delayed, so he was very naive about the ways of the world. Neither worldly nor intelligent was he, but one thing he knew for sure was that he loved Stella. He continued to see her, and though she was now an adult at the age of 21, he still had to bring her home by 10 p.m. They began going to motels to have sex. He got her pregnant at one point. They decided to marry and set a date of Valentine's Day 1992. Joel's family noticed that there was something off about the Sexton children. They all seemed to have an unsettling stare. Pixie's daughter Dawn was 3 years old, but did not play with toys and didn't show any signs that she would begin to talk. Meanwhile, social workers were quietly accumulating a file on the Sexton family. Something just wasn't right in that house. The Sexton children were often absent from school. Their bodies often bore markings from corporal punishment, which sometimes took the form of getting beaten with a belt. One teacher reported that 7-year-old Lana Sexton told her that her father teased and tickled her, which included touching her quote-unquote titties. One worker decided that aside from the inappropriately sexual language, the so-called teasing and tickling did not constitute sexual abuse. The same teacher reported that every time Lana played with a Barbie doll, she would pull off the shirt, point to the chest, and say, "Look at those titties." A counselor tried to talk to Lana about it, but she stonewalled him. There was a long history of these reports, which extended back as far as 1979. An anonymous relative, a hospital worker, and police had contacted Human Services. There were reports of Sexton children who had not been bathing and wore filthy clothing. They were punished with brute violence. When social workers talked to the children, they refused to divulge what was going on behind closed doors. They insisted everything was fine. Surprise visits were paid to the house in 1979 and 1983. The family did not appear to be living in squalor during these visits. The house was clean and well organized. Ed and Estella Sexton came across as concerned parents struggling to raise a large family. During the 1983 investigations, one of the workers complimented Ed Sexton on his parenting skills. In 1989, Sherry Sexton, 16 years old at the time, was interviewed. She was pregnant. She had horizontal scars on the back of her legs. When asked who was responsible for the scars, she said no one was to blame. She claimed the father of her baby was in Mexico. Willie Sexton was a pyromaniac. He'd set the Sexton family home on fire twice. Michelle Sexton was willing to talk with her counselor, Ruth Killian. Michelle said that her parents shunned her. When she got home from school, she was to clean, cook, get her younger siblings ready for bed, and be asleep by 9 p.m. Her siblings were not allowed to talk to her. Her father accused her of trying to, quote-unquote, poison their minds. She was not allowed to leave the house except to go to school. She was not allowed to use the phone. She was suicidal. Michelle said that her father ordered the kids to travel in groups. He gave them all each a quarter. Their duty was to find a payphone and call him if a sibling was found to be talking to classmates or school staff. If any of them witnessed such an incident and did not call their father, they would be harshly punished. County Child Protection worker Wayne Welsh asked Michelle if she felt her family's home environment was appropriate. Michelle: "There's only one way to do anything. There's only one way to think." Welsh: "And what way is that, Michelle?" Michelle: "Dad's way." All Michelle's fears and concerns were traceable back to her father's behavior and parenting techniques. She said that her father issued a warning to all the children. If they talked to officials, they would be taken away from the home and he would be thrown in jail. There is one common obstacle social workers encounter as they endeavor to correct a family's behavior when abuse or neglect is baked into the familial dynamic. That roadblock is a child victim that is reluctant to disclose what is happening to them at home. In many cases, they can be obstinate in maintaining silence, feeling obligated to do so for the sake of the offending parent. More often than not, the consequence for failing to do so can entail more abuse if the authorities do not act at the appropriate time. Michelle Sexton was typical in that regard. Welsh recognized a pattern in the Sexton's behavior that he recognized from his study of cults. The Department of Human Services summarized their domestic culture in this sample from a report they commissioned. Worker Welsh describes the family dynamics as a cult, with Dad as the undisputed leader. Worker noted that he had very strong suspicions of dark secrets being held within this family. Welsh later elaborated on his findings. Whenever you've got somebody who's controlling everybody else by that much fear and encouraging other members of this group to turn on each other, It shows that the leader is very frightened about something getting out. The leader is guarding something that is terrible. February 1992. Michelle Sexton sat in Welsh's office. She was blunt. "I'm pregnant, and they're trying to kill the baby." Wayne Welsh probed for more information. She said she had a boyfriend and that it was his baby. The day before she spoke with Welsh, her younger brother James saw her kissing her boyfriend. He told her father. He backhanded her under her right eye. His ring left a scratch behind in that area. She said, "Then he tried to kick me in the stomach. James did." Her sister Sherry wedged herself between them, screaming, "Get out, you child killer!" Welsh asked Michelle why Sherry called James a child killer. Michelle said, "Sherry was pregnant a year ago, too. Dad didn't want her to deliver the baby." Michelle went on to say that James kicked Sherry in the stomach. She miscarried the same day. It occurred to Welsh that in this household, where the children were seldom allowed outside, and when they were, they had to be accompanied by other family members, something ominous was afoot if 4 babies were born out of wedlock over the preceding 4 years. Michelle was about to turn 18, and there wasn't anything DHS could do for her after that. It occurred to Welsh that if he helped her leave her family's home, she would feel more at ease discussing what went on behind closed doors. He took her to the Canton YWCA, where they had a program for young women in crisis. She could stay there until they could find a family that would be willing to provide her with shelter. That afternoon, officials at Michelle's school contacted her family to tell them she left with a worker for the Department of Human Services. Ed Sexton received the call. She would not be returning home from school. Wayne Welsh took Michelle Sexton to the Jackson Township Police Department to file a report on her father's conduct. Michelle said, "But I don't want to get anyone in trouble." Welsh told her she was not obligated to press charges, but it was in her best interests to document the abuse. The Sexton family was well known by the Jackson Township PD. There was a paper trail dating back to the mid-70s regarding the family's dysfunctional behavior. In fact, about 30 incidents and reports were filed about the Sextons. Patrick and Eddie Jr. were investigated about petty theft allegations. They were also alleged to have assaulted classmates and their siblings. There were reports of fires, burglaries, vandalism, and other crimes going on at the Sexton house. There was some suspicion that Ed Sexton had his designs on committing insurance fraud. Detective Larry Aventino was dispatched to the Sexton home to investigate their report of a burglary. More horrifying than the alleged crime was the condition of the Sexton's house. They lived in squalor. A membrane of filth covered every square inch of the interior. The carpeting looked as though it had never been cleaned. On the beds were dirty sheets that displayed what appeared to be unwashed menstrual blood stains. There were towels hanging from racks in the bathrooms that were positively encrusted with filth. These kinds of conditions are endemic of neglect. It was an exceedingly unhealthy environment for children to live in, and Aventino recognized that this detail required more of the police's attention than the alleged burglary. After his visit to the Sexton house, Aventino contacted the county health department and child protection services. Unfortunately, they did not act as they should have. To quote Aventino, they complained they were short on money and manpower. Ed Sexton's kids continued to cause problems for others. When Patrick Sexton was 22 years old, he pressured a girl named Kathleen Dundee to have sex with him. Kathleen is mentally disabled. He also manipulated her into giving him money. Wayne Welsh and Sergeant Barry Leons took Michelle Sexton to her family's house so she could collect her clothing. The interior of the household was greatly improved compared to the pigsty it had been years earlier. Still, Welsh recognized the stench he smelled whenever he entered into the poorly kept homes of dysfunctional families. In the presence of Welsh and Leons, Ed Sexton tried some last-minute manipulation on Michelle, knowing she would still be intimidated by him. He said, "Now, Michelle, now tell the truth. Did I hit you?" Welsh said to her, "You don't have to answer that, Michelle." He told her later that she was not obligated to tell her father where she was going. Michelle became a problem for the home she was placed in by the shepherding program facilitated by the Pregnancy Support Center of Stark County. She frequently disobeyed many of their rules. One particularly troubling development was when the staff discovered that Michelle was not pregnant. A worker named Anne decided it was time for a heart-to-heart talk with Michelle. Anne said, "Michelle, you need to tell me what has happened to you." Michelle trembled. Anne said, "We know you're not pregnant. But Michelle, why do you think you are?" Michelle began to cry. Then she dropped the bombshell that changed everything. "My dad raped me." Anne and Michelle discussed the abuse to which Michelle was subjected over the subsequent 10 days. Anne told her conclusively that the rape should be reported to the authorities. She told Michelle it would be one step toward healing from the trauma. It would give her the power that was stripped from her by her father. It would take far more than that for her to recover. Michelle said, "No, I try, but I can't forget." She said to Anne one day, "I don't understand why I bled." Anne explained it's a typical occurrence when a girl loses her virginity. Like many abusers, Ed Sexton convinced his victims that they were to blame for the torture he inflicted on them. Michelle said, "It was all my fault if I'd just been stronger." Michelle revealed other aspects of the abuse wreaked upon his family. He beat the children. He beat his wife. Michelle said that her younger sisters were in danger as long as they remained in their father's home. Anne suggested to Michelle that she give a statement to the police so that she could protect her younger siblings. Michelle balked. "No, there are secrets that should never be told to anyone." She said that her father dispatched spies and other sources everywhere. Being one of Ed Sexton's children was an Orwellian nightmare. He even had friends in the police department. She was convinced that if she told police about all the abuse, her father would track her down and kill her. This was not a figment of a paranoid imagination. Ed had vowed for years that he would do it. He would position his index finger and thumb like a cocked pistol and say, "A good snitch is a dead snitch." Michelle was just as afraid of him at the time of the interview as she was years prior. Anne spent the next 10 days talking to Michelle. She tried every trick in the book to persuade her to open up to the police. An ominous development emerged when the shepherding family with which Michelle was staying began to receive phone calls from someone who did not speak. They could only be heard breathing before hanging up. The family wanted Michelle removed. She had become more troublesome for them than they were willing to allow. Michelle was remanded to a shelter for battered women. The location was top secret. Michelle would benefit from this privacy only if she complied with the shelter's rules. She decided she would talk to the police, but not if she had to do so at the police department. As she explained to Anne, "Dad always said if I went there, they would lock me up there and take his side." Detective Glenn Goh compromised and agreed to interview Michelle at the offices of the DARE Drug Prevention Program. Go had responded to a call at the Sexton's home to investigate a fire set under suspicious circumstances, and accompanied Michelle and remained at her side. The first thing he wanted to know was the names and ages of everybody who lived in the house. The complete list. Ed Sexton, 49, also known as Eddie and Eddie Lee. All the children called him Dad. Estella May, 44. The children called her Mom. Other people addressed her as May. Patrick Sexton, 24. Eddie Sexton Jr., 23. Stella Sexton, 22. William Sexton, 21. Sherry Sexton, 19. Charles Sexton, 16. James Sexton, 15. Matthew Sexton, 14. Christopher Sexton, 13. Lana Sexton, 12. Kimberly Sexton, 7. Then there was Stella's 2 daughters, Dawn and Shasta. Stella's husband, Joel Good, was living in the house. Sherry had a child, an 8-month-old son named Christopher. Go asked her if all 17 of them lived in the house. Michelle said that only 15 of them lived there. She said that the master bedroom, the sleeping quarters of her parents, was off limits to everyone in the house except 7-year-old Kimberly. She always slept with her parents. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs. When Michelle still lived there, she shared the largest bedroom with Pixie, Sherry, and Lana. Eventually, Pixie moved to a smaller room with her babies. Joel would end up sharing the room with them. When Sherry had her child, she transferred to the den, where she slept on the couch. Charles, James, Matthew, and Christopher slept in another bedroom on the same floor. Patrick and Eddie Jr. left home at 18 and were married. Patrick was a half-sibling to the others, having been born before Ed and Estella met. All the children had nicknames, which were chosen by their father. Eddie Jr. was Eddie Bug. Patrick was Bozo. Stella was Pixie. William was Willie Bug. Sherry was Bunny. Charles was Skipper. James was Bird. Christopher was Sugar Tooth. Lana was Angel. Kimberly was Groundhog, though sometimes she was addressed just as Hog. Pixie's daughter Dawn was dubbed Cockroach, or sometimes just Roach, because of her diminutive height. Michelle was called Candy until she began to rebel in her teens. At that point, her father called her Diarrhea Mouth. Go, your sister's children. Where are their fathers? Michelle, everyone knows they're my dad's kids. Go, how do you know that? Michelle, we just do. She said it matter-of-factly, as if it were common knowledge. Go asked her about the time when her father raped her. She said it was in December. He told her he wanted to take her for a ride alone with him so that they could discuss her future. It concerned her prospects for gaining entry into college, or at least that's how he explained it. Michelle said it was a big deal. She was referring to the ride itself. She was so used to being isolated in the house and never going anywhere besides school. Going for a drive to a place like a gas station or a convenience store was so exotic to her after the life she had lived that it was practically akin to an African safari. Ed took her in the family's van to Wales Square. He parked in a lot behind the store. It was a dark winter's night. Michelle, I told him I thought we were going to talk about my future. Go. And what did he say? Michelle, he told me to shut up. From there, Ed slapped Michelle. He forced her into the back of the van. She was wearing a denim skirt and a blouse. He ripped her panties off. He pinned her arms to the floor with so much force there were handprint-shaped bruises on her arms the next day. She was reluctant to discuss the sordid details. Go. Did he penetrate you? Michelle. Yes. Go. Did he threaten you? Ed said to her, Say anything to anybody and I'll kill you. It would be very easy. Girls disappear every day. Go. Did you believe you were in danger? Michelle. He knows people who would do it for him. She mentioned that her brother Eddie Jr. also knew people who may have specialized in making people disappear. Go shifted gears. He asked about Ed Sr.'s source of income. She said he was on some kind of disability benefits. He claimed to have a bad back, though she was always suspicious about it. She also mentioned that he painted with her uncle Otis Sexton. She said that whenever the disability people came by to check on him, he would be sitting in a wheelchair. Once they left, he was back on his feet. Over the next couple of weeks, Anne continued to check in with Michelle. There wasn't much action on the social worker and law enforcement front, however. As far as Anne was concerned, this was an outrage. The children who remained at the Sexton house were in danger. Ed Sexton should have been behind bars by then. Michelle disclosed more shocking secrets about her family. She said her father kissed her sisters Kimberly and Lana on the lips when he said goodbye while they prepared to leave for school. Michelle said, I didn't want to see the same thing happen to them that had happened to me. She went into detail about the corporal punishment. Her parents referred to them as whoopins. The latest child to become the recipient of this punishment would report to the master bedroom. They were to remove their pants and present their naked buttocks. Ed administered the whooping. His wife usually watched. He would hit their thighs or buttocks. Sometimes he would instruct the child to go to the yard and return with a switch. She would bring back the thinnest stick she could find. The thicker ones left bruises, and that would keep her out of school. Michelle loved school. Because Michelle was the rebel and black sheep of the family, she was beaten almost every day. Michelle didn't get to engage in the typical activities that teenagers enjoy, like going to the mall or to dances. She did get to dance, however, though the circumstances were hardly ideal. Ed would gather all the children in the living room on Friday night. He would tune into a rock radio station and order them all to dance. They had no choice. He would watch. Sometimes they were required to dance for hours. He would sit in his chair, smoking cigarettes and watching. Sometimes he would position the girls where he wanted to see them. He often dictated how he wanted them to move their torsos and hips. There were 2 sets of rules for the children, one set for the boys, the other for the girls. The girls were not allowed to leave the house when school was not in session. The boys had more freedom. In some cases, they were even permitted to participate in school sports. May had no say about anything that went on in the house. The children did all the housework. When Ed realized Michelle was pregnant, somehow he knew, despite the fact that she was not yet showing. It was then that he told her she was finally allowed to have a boyfriend. She dated a boy named Jeff. Ed took a liking to Jeff. He became a mentor to the boy. He encouraged him to propose marriage to Michelle. He even provided him with an engagement ring to give her. She hoped it would be her ticket out of her father's home. Things were going well at the women's shelter until Michelle stayed out after curfew one day. As it got later and later, Anne drove all over town trying to find Michelle. She spent 2 hours driving around. She finally found her when Anne saw her walking. She was shivering. When she was asked about why she left the shelter, she said she hated it there. Eventually, the shelter evicted Michelle because she revealed the location to a boy she met. Michelle moved in with an older woman she met who had lived at the shelter. She would bounce around with similar such arrangements throughout the next several months. Michelle's rootlessness came to an end when she was admitted to a psychiatric ward. She had tried to commit suicide by taking a large quantity of painkillers. Her stomach was pumped before the damage could be done. Dealing with the trauma and the police investigation became a burden with which she struggled to cope. She had had some contact with relatives. Pixie and Joel visited her. Pixie promised she would testify against her father. Joel was appalled by what he learned about the abuse. Eddie Jr. called her, though his agenda was steeped in malice aforethought. To quote Michelle, "He told me if I talked about what went on at home, he'd shut me up." Michelle said to Anne, "Oh, Anne, I only want to live with you." This was not an option Anne was willing to provide, especially since Ed and his son appeared to be capable of violence, and worse, and they also appeared to be serious about retaliating against Michelle. Michelle's uncle Otis visited her in the hospital. She told him there was something important she wanted to tell him. He said, "Honey, listen. Nothing you say is going to put me back on my heels." Michelle told him that her father raped her. He said, "Honey, I've got to be honest with you. I've been suspecting it for years." She gave him Wayne Welsh's business card. She said, "Uncle Odie, I think you should call this man." Otis Sexton called Wayne Welsh the next morning. Welsh said, "What did she tell you?" Otis told him the story about the rape. Welsh said, "Mr. Sexton, you've just made my day." April 2nd. The Department of Human Services received an anonymous tip over the telephone. The woman identified only as a relative of the Sexton family. She reported that Sherry Sexton had been sexually abused by her father. She said she was afraid that the younger children were moving targets for the same treatment. This was the catalyst that motivated officials to put Wayne Welsh back on the case. On April 3rd, Welsh interviewed Lana and Kimberly Sexton at their school. They both denied that there were problems at home. He had one more interview that day. Michelle Sexton at her uncle Otis's house. She revealed that her father tried to rape her when she was 12, but, quote, "he couldn't get it in." She told him about the rape in the van. She went on to say that Pixie and Sherry had been having sex with their father since they were 12 years old. She reported witnessing her father having sex with Sherry in the family's van. Welsh asked her about punishment the children received for their transgressions. To quote Michelle, "You get the belt until you're 16, then you graduate to the fist." The rest of the school-aged children were interviewed, but they only responded with one-word answers. They stared in their customary way, devoid of emotion. Eventually, DHS workers coined it the Sexton stare. After a pickup order was approved by a judge, Wayne Welsh, other social workers, and Jackson Township Police were dispatched to the schools the youngest Sexton children attended. They assumed custody of Kimberly, 7, Lana, 12, and Matthew, 14. Welsh later paraphrased what he said to the children. What we said to the kids was something along the lines that your parents have some problems that they need to work on at this point, and we believe for now you need to be in a home where you're going to be safe. Then, hopefully we'll be able to get these problems resolved, so you'll be able to go back home at some time with your parents, if that's what you want. The children were compliant and were placed in the care of the social workers without incident. It wasn't always that easy. Christopher, 13, was not at his middle school. James, 16, was not in class at Jackson High. Welsh tracked down Charles, 17. Charles was belligerent. At first he refused to go, but Welsh talked him into it. 4:30 p.m. The police officers and social workers arrived at the Sexton's house to pick up the rest of the children. It was there where the police found Christopher and James. The parents followed them outside. Ed Sexton Sr. said, "This is all a big misunderstanding." Estella said, referring to Ed, "He doesn't molest anybody. He doesn't hurt none of these kids." The officials took all the children to the home of Otis Sexton. He promised that he and his daughters would take care of the children until a shelter care hearing that was booked for the next day. As Welsh put it, the agency always tries to place kids with an appropriate relative when we can, because the kids are less discombobulated. It's less traumatic that way. Anne commended Michelle for what she had done. She said, "I'm so very proud of you. You're the only one of 12 who is finally strong enough to try to break the chain of abuse." However, a Pandora's box of horrors was about to burst open and wreak havoc with all who were involved. To quote Anne, "She was the girl with her finger in the dike. Little did anyone know that when she removed it, all hell was going to break loose." Ed Sexton insisted he was innocent. He accused Michelle and Otis of trumping up the charges. To quote Ed, "And that one social worker, Mr. Welsh, he gets up and really vilified me and my wife. And we were sitting there. The referee says, 'All right, you've ground up enough meat, you've ground up enough hamburger.' So then my wife and myself asked our attorney if we could have the children taken from Otis's home, because Otis, he's got a mental condition, and he's always doing this kind of stuff. He's always interfering in everybody's life." The court ordered that the minor children would be placed in temporary foster care. There they would remain as the DHS proceeded with their investigation. Ed procured the services of an attorney. One of his objectives was to obtain a court order that would prevent Otis or any other relative from having contact with his children while the case was still pending. Meanwhile, Otis told social workers that he didn't want custody of the children. The conspiracy theory put forward by Ed was a product of his imagination. Otis explained that Ed had a tendency to project his faults onto others. Indeed, Michelle revealed that her father told her Otis had sex with his own daughters. There was a lot of bad blood between Ed and Otis. Otis disclosed that Ed was fanatically religious and a preacher. He paid for a $5 license to officiate at weddings. Ed distorted the meanings within Scripture. The congregation was comprised only of family members and friends. Ed was dismissed by most local Christians as a crackpot. Wayne Welsh interviewed the Sexton children again on the afternoon of the day of the shelter hearing. Though Charles was the family tough guy, he broke down and cried while reporting what went on in his family's home. He said that both his mother and father beat him on a regular basis. He recalled an incident wherein he and his brother Matt were made by their father to stand naked in the living room in front of the entire family. They were made to hold encyclopedias in their hands. He was punished for eating without permission. He was beaten for leaving a ball in a neighbor's yard. He said his mother once choked and scratched him after accusing him of fondling his 12-year-old sister Lana. He said that not only did he witness his mother being beaten by his father, but he saw Ed hold a shotgun to her head on one occasion. Matt confirmed that the encyclopedia story was true. He also said he was beaten regularly. He said one day Michelle told him she went downstairs and saw her father and Pixie having sex on the couch. 16-year-old James confirmed that he and the other children were beaten frequently. He said his father offered bribes in return for spying on his siblings. He confirmed Charles's story about being choked. Regarding the sexual abuse, he said, "There's lots of sex in the family." Welsh asked for details. James referred to something dubbed the Loven Belly. He and Kimberly were required to sniff each other's stomachs and armpits, following up by sniffing their legs and feet. One cryptic revelation came in the words, "He wants me to be a dog." James would not elaborate. James said he never wanted to see his parents again. He feared them more than ever, now that he was informing on them. As James put it, "If Dad knew, he would kill me. He said he would shoot me with a gun." 12-year-old Lana confirmed what her siblings said about the beatings. Occasionally, Ed would beat the kids until they bled. Christopher and Kimberly refused to talk. 4 days after the children were removed, Michelle went to the Jackson Township Police Department, accompanied by Detective Go. Lee Sexton went along for moral support. Anne pressured Detective Go to seek an arrest warrant for Ed Sexton. The obstacle to getting the warrant was the purely anecdotal evidence. As Go put it, "We had no physical exam, no corroborating evidence. It was her word against her father's, and that was about it." Plus, Michelle's behavior during the first interview was odd, leading him to believe that her integrity may have been compromised. In her second interview with Go, Michelle gave more satisfactory answers. Michelle said that before Dawn was born, she, Sherry, and Matt began to confide in one another. They wondered if their father and Pixie were having sex. One night, Stella was sleeping on the couch in the living room. Michelle walked down to the living room, acting like she was sleepwalking. When she arrived at the living room, she saw that her father was with her sister, and that they were both naked. Ghost said, "What were they doing?" Michelle said, "They were doing what husband and wife do." Michelle told Sherry and Matt what she saw. She also suspected that Sherry was having sex with her father. One day, he took her out for a drive, just the two of them. When they returned, Ed looked unkempt. His fly was halfway down, and his shirt was hanging out of his pants. Go, "Didn't you ask Sherry?" Michelle, "No." Go, "Why not?" Michelle, "We never talked about each other. We'd only talk about her sister Stella." Go, "Did you ever talk to Stella about what happened?" Michelle, "No." Go, "Why?" Michelle, "Because she was Daddy's girl. She'd tell him everything we said." Michelle explained that she was convinced that Dawn and Shasta were her father's children because Pixie had never dated a boy until after she gave birth to her children. She said that Sherry's son Christopher had to be her father's child because Sherry had also never dated before she became pregnant. She described the beatings, which sometimes went on for long periods of time to test the children's endurance. Her mother also enjoyed dishing out the physical abuse. Michelle disclosed that despite Ed's posturing as a pious and devout Christian, he was dishonest and took advantage of charitable organizations who were informed that he had muscular dystrophy, which was not true. As Michelle remarked, "These charity people came out and looked. They remodeled the house for my dad." She said that the foundation gave him a hospital bed, a wheelchair, and completely refurbished the master bedroom with new fixtures. Go asked her for more details about the rape. She said it was preceded by an argument. To quote Michelle, "My dad asked, 'Did you see anything in the basement?' Then he started getting madder and madder." She struggled to discuss the graphic details of the rape. She confirmed that he penetrated her vaginally with his penis. She asked him to stop, but he wouldn't. It was totally against her will. After he was done with her, He drove her to a gas station and said to her, "Clean yourself up." When they arrived home, she ran upstairs. He complained to her mother that she was on her period. Go asked her if there was any kind of sexual contact before the rape. She said that when she was 12 years old, he took her for a ride in his car. It was the first time he had ever taken her alone somewhere, and she was excited. She recalled what happened along the way. We got halfway there, and he said, "Have you ever had a secret? Can you keep a secret?" I said, "Yes." "Do you know about sex?" I said, "No." "Do you want me to teach you?" I said, "I don't know." At the time, the house was being repaired following a fire. They were living elsewhere, but Ed stopped by the house to pick up his mail. He brought Michelle inside so he could rape her. To quote Michelle, "He tried, but I was too small." Go asked Michelle to elaborate on what happened in the basement. She said she was ascending the basement steps after obtaining some laundry soap. She was able to see into the basement garage from a small window at the level of the stairs. "Michelle, my dad and Eddie were down there. I dropped the bottle thing and ran upstairs." Go, "What did you see?" Michelle, "I don't know specifically if it was alive or if it was dead, but I thought I'd seen something in the back of the car. That was it. That's all it was about." Go, "What is it you think you saw?" "Did you have any idea?" Michelle, "Yeah, I had a pretty good idea, but I'm not going to say." Go, "You thought you saw a body?" Michelle nodded. Go, "What kind?" Michelle, "Human." Go, "Who was there beside your dad?" Michelle, "Eddie." Go, "Your brother? Did your dad explain anything as to what you saw?" Michelle, "He said it was none of my business." Michelle said that when she talked to her father about it in the van, Ed said that if she told anybody about what she saw, she wouldn't go to college. He raped her afterwards, as if to drive home the point. She talked about how her family reacted to her leaving. When she contacted Eddie Jr., she told him what was happening in her life, and he relayed all the information to their father. Go asked her how she knew he was passing all the information to Ed Sr. She said, "I started getting phone calls in the hospital from him, saying, 'You're no longer my sister, so therefore I have no respect for you. I'm going to finish you off.' And my sister Sherry told me she no longer wanted to be my sister because all the kids would be taken from my dad, and it was all my fault. She said I opened my mouth and said things I shouldn't have said. She said the other kids hadn't disclosed as much as she had because they were intimidated by their father." Go and Welsh asked Michelle if the girls were treated differently than the boys. Michelle, "Sexually?" Go, "Sexually or otherwise." Michelle, "My dad had a little thing with the boys, but..." Go, "What was that?" Michelle, "Poontang." Michelle laughed. Go, "Okay." Michelle, "My dad would be like, I get some butt tonight. Or do this, I'll be up tonight getting some butt." I don't know if he was joking or what. She said one evening the previous summer, he brought all the boys into the bathroom and measured their penises. Go, "Why did your dad do that?" Michelle, "I don't know." She said that the boys were allowed to date. Go, "Are there more secrets?" Michelle, "Yes. There's been sexual things that happened to me that I haven't even told you." Go, "Is there a reason why?" Michelle, "Yeah, because it's hard to talk about it." Wayne Welsh asked Go if he could ask a couple of questions. Go said sure. Welsh, "What was your nickname, Michelle?" Michelle, "I don't like to say my nickname." For a moment, all three of them were silent. Finally, she answered, Deep throat. Welsh. Who calls you that? Michelle. My dad. Welsh asked her about the origin of this nickname. Michelle said she learned how to swallow a hot dog in Toto when she was 16 years old. This appeared to have made her father proud. He ordered her to demonstrate it to relatives, Uncle Otis among them. She said Otis once rescued her when his daughters were babysitting. Michelle had been tied up in her bedroom. Welsh learned from one of the other Sexton children that Michelle and one of her brothers saw Ed Sr. and Sherry having sex in the van. They were already in the van when Ed and Sherry came out. They hid under a tarpaulin in the back seat. Michelle. We just heard things. Welsh. What kind of things? Michelle. Doing their thing. Welsh. Having intercourse? Michelle. Yes. She said this may have happened in 1987. Welsh. Did you hear your dad talking? Michelle. He asked her, did she want kids? And Sherry said, not right now, because she was in school. My dad said, how about later on in life? Sherry said she didn't care. Welsh. Why would your dad ask that? Michelle. Did she want any? Welsh. Yeah. Michelle. I don't know. Ask him. Go needed more details about the rape. Go. If at some point in time it would be possible to file criminal charges on your father for that, you would want that done? Michelle. You mean to get up in front of a judge and tell a judge what happened? Go nodded. Michelle. I mean, yes, I would want to do that, but at this point I can't say every detail what happened as to what my father did to me, because I'll probably start cracking up. Not laughing, but emotionally. I don't know what would happen. I'd like to get to the point where I'm strong enough to handle it. The only reason I'm here and want to stay here is my brother and sisters are out of the house. She said she wasn't quite ready for that kind of pressure, with all its performance anxiety and the aggressive scrutiny of a defense attorney. Michelle. I'd like to have one person. Every time I find one person to begin talking about it, they say, I can't handle this, and run away. Welsh. You'll never have that with us. After they finished Michelle's interview, they brought in Otis Sexton. Go. You said at one point in time you thought there was some type of abuse or problems in the family, some things that struck you? Otis. I didn't think. I knew. Otis recalled the incident when his daughters reported to him that Ed's kids were tied up. Otis. One of my daughters went over to babysit and called and told me the kids were tied up. I told them to immediately untie them. I went over to pick my daughter up and I talked to Eddie. Otis said he remembered that the kids had been tied up a minimum of 3 occasions. He said he also suspected that incest was going on in their house for some time. He recalled seeing Ed and Sherry kissing a few times, and that the manner of it struck him as inappropriate. Otis thought that he may have known how Ed's deviant sexual activities originated. He described Ed's criminal history. He said Ed's experiences in prison corrupted him. This may have been true. Some ex-cons refer to prison as con college. This is because the more experienced inmates teach the newbies how to both be more effective as criminals and to stay one step ahead of the law. Ed's children said that their father had no criminal record, and that it was Otis who was not only an ex-con, but was a repeat offender. More projection. But it was Ed's sexual proclivities that were more corrupted than any other aspect of his being. As Otis put it, that's when I think all this started. As the interview drew to a close, Goes said, You've heard some of the things Michelle has said. Do you think she's telling the truth? Otis said, Yes, she is. This is not a put-on. I told her, Michelle, don't exaggerate, and this fear that she has is real. And I know for a fact that if her dad knows where she is at, he's going to come and get her. But he won't come to my house because he knows what I'll do to him. He said that all the children were scared of Ed. To quote Otis, "It's like Willie said when he called me the other day. If my dad knew I was talking to you, he'd kill me." Within that context, the children used words like murder and kill in the most literal sense possible. Detective Go ran criminal record checks on Ed Sexton Sr. and Otis Sexton. Otis Sexton was clean. Ed Sexton, on the other hand, was a career criminal. He served a 5-year sentence at Moundsville State Prison. Go interviewed Otis Sexton's daughters. They were all adults and married. They had some disturbing tales to tell about the family dynamic in Ed Sexton's House of Horrors. Teresa Samblett, 29, was 16 years old when she showed up to babysit one day. What she saw when she found Michelle, who was 3 years old at the time, was that she was tied to her bed, with her wrist bound to one post and her ankle to the post by her feet. The ligatures were tied so tightly that Michelle's hand was purple. She was lying in her own urine and feces. Teresa tried to untie the shoelaces with which Michelle was bound, but could not. She called Otis, who came by to remove the constraints. Teresa said that the kids who were tied up most often were Eddie Jr., Skipper, Michelle, and Sherry. Pixie was never bound. She was reportedly Ed's favorite. Teresa: a lot of times the kids would be locked in the bedrooms. Not every one of them, just certain ones. Sometimes I'd use the knife to get the doors open. Sometimes I couldn't get them open, so my dad would have to come over. Teresa recalled finding the children naked in a pitch-dark bedroom that had been emptied of furniture. Buckets were not provided for urination and defecation, so the children were left with no alternative but to use the floor as a latrine. There was a time when there was no electricity in the house. Teresa recalled Ed Sr.'s bizarre explanation. The father said the kids peed in the light sockets, and he had to disconnect the wires so nobody got shocked. One night, when she was babysitting, she found James, who was a toddler at the time, in a playpen occupying an otherwise empty room. It was dark. A blanket had been placed over the window. She recalled what happened when she attended to his needs. When I took him into the light, he went nuts, like the light was killing his eyes. He was a mess. He had dried up stool all over him. God knows how long he was in there. James is developmentally disabled. Teresa's theory about the cause of this condition in James was the abuse and neglect to which he was subjected growing up. Early experiences with the trauma of child abuse can lead to neurological damage since the brain will not develop normally. It can lead not just to developmental delays, but also to learning disabilities and mental illness. Go asked Teresa's sister, Faith McDaniels, who was 25 at the time of the interview, what Ed and Estella would say to her before they left the children in her care. Faith: the father would say, "The kids are upstairs. They're bad. Don't worry about them." Faith recalled what happened when she would set the children free. Faith: as soon as the parents pulled out of the driveway, I went to get the kids out of the rooms, and the ones that were out said I was going to get in trouble, or the kids were going to get in trouble. They'd getting a whooping because they got out of the bedrooms. Michelle underwent a polygraph examination. Her answers were proven to be non-deceptive. The Sexton case was now overseen on a long-term basis by the DHS's ongoing unit. A social worker would monitor the family. When appropriate, They would arrange supervised visits between the children and their parents at a location chosen by the agency. It was a facility designed for this purpose, called Harmony House. If necessary, the worker would arrange counseling and therapy. The ultimate goal was to sort out the family's problems and achieve reunification under conditions the agency would consider to be optimum. The worker's name was Bonita Hilson. Ed Sr. was a bigot, so he wasn't exactly thrilled when he found out that he would be forced to obey a woman of African American heritage. Estella claimed to be of Native American extraction. She was aware that according to federal law, she was entitled to have all child welfare matters handled by Indian child welfare officials. The court took this under advisement, but made no promises. The parents were not permitted to contact the children outside of Harmony House. Nevertheless, the DHS suspected that they violated this rule. They were seen outside of Faircrest Middle School, where Christopher was enrolled. They were seen interacting with Christopher. A teacher, custodian, and cook witnessed this incident. Christopher's foster parents believed that Ed and Estella Sexton followed them home one day. Ed offered his oldest sons cars if they recanted their allegations of abuse. He had been visiting the children at their foster homes, so they had to be reassigned. Skipper revealed the locations to Ed. He was placed in the Canton Children's Residential Center, basically a juvenile hall. DHS attorneys filed a second no-contact order complaint against Ed Sexton. It became clear to DHS that they were limited in their capacity to keep Ed Sexton away from his children. Michelle was not safe. Ed was using every trick in his playbook to get her back or get revenge. His children's boundaries never mattered to him, and now their safety would take a back seat as he was solely oriented toward self-preservation. Otis felt that the justice system was not acting fast enough. He had some picket signs made that read, "Arrest child abusers." He had some leaflets printed that described the Sexton case. He and his sisters began protesting outside the Citizens Building. The case began to receive some coverage in the local newspaper. Meanwhile, Michelle had become a serious source of stress while she was staying at Otis's home. Jackie Sexton taught Michelle basic feminine hygiene. She showed her how to take care of her hair and other aspects of her appearance. Michelle became increasingly disrespectful toward Jackie, even calling her a bitch on one occasion. It was hard to take, considering what they were doing for her. She left one day after Otis and Michelle had an altercation. She wound up back at her family's home, though she had a severe panic attack and had to be taken to hospital. Michelle deliberately threw a monkey wrench into the investigation. She wrote the following affidavit, which was handwritten and signed. It was notarized on September 1st, 1992. The text: I, Shelley Sexton, of 8149 Caroline, do hereby state that I did not make any of the allegations that was brought against my father. To have the younger kids taken from the home, my uncle was talking to the kids one by one in his bedroom. He told them to say they will get to come home soon. My uncle is doing this because he is jealous of my father, and always will be. Michelle stayed in her parents' house for a month. During that time, her mother asked her if the rape allegations were true. Michelle verified that they were. May had told her that she was about to divorce Ed. Michelle resumed life in the house. even sleeping in her old bedroom. 2 nights later, she was woken late at night by voices in the living room. When she went downstairs to investigate, she saw the glowing ash of a cigarette above her father's armchair. It was vintage Ed Sexton. So was this statement that he made to her. "Girls disappear every day. We put you on this earth. We can take you off." He gestured in the general direction of the pond. He said, "Michelle, there's a lot of lake out there." She had nowhere else to go, so she stayed in her father's house. He visited her every night. Michelle later admitted that it was Ed who composed the affidavit. Her mother drove her to her lawyer's office so it could be filed. As Michelle said, "I just sat there. He asked me if I wanted to say anything. I just shook my head no." With no physical evidence of the rapes and Michelle Sexton's retraction of the allegations in the affidavit, the case no longer had a leg to stand on. The case was a clusterfuck by this point. With new allegations being made and others withdrawn, it was difficult to know who to believe. Skipper was now being accused of sexually abusing his siblings. The prospect of getting justice for these children was looking more and more grim as time went on. Ed Sexton called the newsroom of Channel 5, a Cleveland television station. He told an assistant assignment editor named Julie Carelli that he was tired of being harassed by the Department of Human Services. He claimed that he was barricaded with his wife and children in his home. He also said that social workers were fixing on taking away his son. About this, he said, "I've got weapons. I'll kill any worker or police that pulls into my drive." With that, he hung up. Corelli called Jackson Township Police. She reported the call and assigned a reporter to maintain contact with the police. Meanwhile, at the Sexton house, Ed Sexton was preparing for war. He and his son Willie went to Indiana to pick up Charles after police visited the house looking for Skipper. Skipper said, "My dad was saying we got to get those kids back. Me and Willie and my dad, we came up with some schemes for the standoff. So we loaded up the car, got a bunch of chicken wire, started getting weapons, canned food. We had food out the ass. A big-ass propane stove. I mean, we was ready." Their objective was to force DHS to give custody of all the children to Mae Sexton. From there, Ed would live away from the home, but he would return during the Christmas season. During that time, he would collect his family and leave the state. He claimed to have friends in the mafia. He proposed that they assume new identities and jobs. He wasn't going to take James with them. He told Charlie and Willie that he intended to tape James up in the basement and leave him there to starve to death for talking to the authorities. Ed Sexton and Sons did all they could to battle-proof their home. They propped mattresses and furniture up against the entrance doors. They placed heavy tabletops over the picture windows. They hammered spikes into the trim. When they ran out of tables, they used interior doors. They even used kitchen cabinet doors. They placed chicken wire around the perimeter of the shooter positions. The chicken wire was stapled around the small windows. They hung black garbage bags over these windows so that police would not be able to discern shadows through the glass. They were armed with pistols and shotguns. They bought a large gross of ammunition. The day of the siege, 2 police officers were dispatched to the Sexton house, but they didn't go there right away. They called their home from a payphone outside of a convenience store. A patrolman asked to speak to Ed. May told him that he wouldn't come to the phone. Another cop asked May if Ed had weapons. She said he did. When he asked her if he might hurt her or the kids, she said she didn't know. More officers arrived on Caroline Street, but they continued to negotiate. When Ed finally spoke with them, he said, "It's the system against me and my family. They've already taken some of my kids, but they're not going to take Charlie." The officer notified Ed that the media would soon arrive and that everything he would do would be documented by them and could be used in court against him. Ed eventually proposed making a deal. He wanted a letter from Child Protective Services that he and his wife would get all the kids back immediately. 3 hours later, DHS notified Ed of their own conditions. They would remove Benita Hilson from the case. They would also promise not to remove Christopher and Kimberly from his home. Captain Steve Zerby arrived at the Sexton house. Skipper said later that he and his brothers were aiming handguns at Zerby and fully intended to shoot him. As Charles put it, "I thought I was going to shoot somebody, My adrenaline was built. I was pissed. And then Captain Zerby comes out. I thought it was going to be a little fight at least. The old man walks right out. Damn. What the fuck's going on? I mean, if I heard a firecracker or something, Captain Zerby was through. Or just shoot a couple of times. That's fun, not shooting people. I mean, just shooting a gun. It gives you a rush. It's a fun sport." Ed and Zerby walked out of the house together at one point. He was placed in handcuffs and put in a squad car. When police searched the house, they only found one handgun and one shotgun, far less than Ed claimed. Ed and Charles were forbidden from having contact with minors. The kids were left with May Sexton. The case fell into disarray due to legal complications, and everyone in the Sexton family, related by blood or not, were tangled up in their own tumultuous interactions. May Sexton described some of her interactions with Ed Sr. and some of his behavior in general at the time. May: "He was sneaking in the house, yeah, and I told him what was going to happen with the DHS, and he said, 'Nobody's going to find out.' I said, 'Well, what happened with the bigger ones isn't going to happen with the little ones.' When I was on Caroline, when I got custody back of the kids, he was accusing me of having an affair with Pat Menikos, who was my attorney. I didn't trust Eddie. I couldn't trust him anymore. In September, he threatened me with a gun while Shelley was there. I called Jackson Township Police, and they came, and I was telling them, and they said, 'Well, we can't do anything about it unless he was there, and they seen something and all this stuff.' The only reason Michelle recanted was because she was threatened by her dad. He asked her how long she was going to stay with me, and I said, 'She's going to stay as long as she wants to stay. You don't have anything to say about it.' He said, 'Well, she better be writing a statement that I didn't do anything to her, because I'm not going to have lies told on me.' Well, I just wanted to get away from him, because I had Kim and Chris, and I didn't want to lose them over his stupidity. Coming to the house all the time. He wanted me to meet him with the kids one night, and I told him, 'I'm going to call social services and have them come get the kids. You don't deserve them.' He told me I was going to pay for it. So we packed some things in the van, Chris, Kim, and I went to Elizabethtown, Kentucky. I was going to get in touch with my brother to help me find a place to hide from Eddie, and I was planning on calling social services, but the van broke. Something happened to the brakes. So I called my daughter Pixie and asked her to wire me some money, but she let her dad know where I was. Eddie Jr. brought Eddie down in his van. They fixed my van, and that's when we came back to Ohio, arguing all the way. He brought us back from Kentucky to a motel, and then Willie left in the morning, and when he came back, there were all kinds of wire and stuff in the back of the van. We went to the house, and him and William started putting this wire and stuff all over the house. After they took Eddie to jail, I took off with the kids again. I moved to Eddie Jr.'s house, but Eddie Jr. wanted to get his father out of jail. He put his dad's rifle to my head, like his dad did, and threatened me if I didn't get him out of jail. He was drinking and I was petrified. He wanted to sell my van for bail money. I wanted to get away from there. So the kids and I went and stayed with this black lady. I don't even remember her name. She'd been at our house before. It was the only place I could figure out to go because Pixie had my Pontiac. I was afraid of my son and afraid of Eddie. Eddie was always talking about, he's got friends here and he's got friends there, and I was a nervous wreck. I didn't even know there was a family court hearing. We stayed with the black lady about a week because we were there, Thanksgiving. She fixed Thanksgiving dinner for the kids. Then Eddie Sr. come driving up in my Pontiac, and him and the black lady got into an argument. He owed her money, quite a bit, I guess, and he acted like he was going to stay all night. But as soon as she went up to bed, that's, when he told us to get into the car. We went to the Lincoln Motel and we stayed there. Pixie and Joel came there, something about switching the tires on the car. Eddie had a big envelope of money. I don't know where he got it, but it was really full. He left the motel, and Chris and I were talking about if we could just get some of that money his dad had, what we were going to do. But when he came back, he had Eddie Jr.'s motorhome. I don't know how he got it, but he had the boys put everything in the motorhome. And that's when we left Ohio. Augusta Townsend was loosely acquainted with the Sexton family. Her cousin's girlfriend committed suicide in her house, and Ed Sr. went there to purge Augusta's house of dark spirits. He blessed the home and said, "All the demons are out." There was more. Augusta. See, 'cause I would sneak out there to Caroline, and they wouldn't even know I was there. One day I went to the open window and Willie was with Pixie, and Eddie had a cat on the table, worshipping the cat with candles and stuff. I turned around and left. See, I'm a sneaky little bitch. Excuse my English. I wanted to know what was going on. So another time I parked my van about 3 blocks around the corner. I was nosy. I caught him fucking this girl in that shed right when you first come in. I don't know that girl. 16, 18, I can't say. She was not as tall as me. I mean, the man was a whore to his days, you hear me? Then, after he moved out of the house, we used to go out to the trailer park and see Eddie Sr. He kept moving because he was supposed to stay away from his wife. I went out there, sir, and Pixie come out with some shorts up the crack of her ass. You could see her pussy, excuse my language. You could see her nipples through her shirt. I went into that trailer and I'm telling you, it smelled just like good time pussy. I said to my cousin, we better get the fuck out of here now. I didn't see any other man around but Eddie, so evidently there had to be some deep fucking going on. Before we left, the mother drove up. She spoke to me, and when she went in that trailer, man, she was throwing dishes and everything else at Eddie Sexton. She knew her daughter was fucking that man. That girl Pixie, I seen it in her a long time ago that she's very jealous about her dad. She'd come around the house. Too jealous. I mean, it's just like a husband and wife jealousy. And she didn't want nobody close to her daddy. It was like, don't get 2 feet in front of my daddy. Okay, and the mother was nervous and all that, but she's just as wrong. Because I'm going to tell you something. If she was any piece of woman, I wouldn't allow my husband to fuck my kids. Do that freaky fool shit. He'd have been the hell out of my house, and he'd have never come back. All of them was sexual. I seen his little girl Kimberly just crawl, climb, and squirm like some sex maniac on top of her daddy. It's just like you train a dog. If you train a dog to hump, he will. Everybody acted like they was deep in love with that man, all the way down to the youngest. And they don't want you around their daddy. They look at you like a demon that's going to kill you. But the mother acted like she didn't give a fuck. Excuse my English. All she cared about was Christopher. And she showed me those family pictures. She was in the bedroom. She said, "This is Chris, my love." Something ain't going on right, I thought. And that night, I come downstairs to use the bathroom, and I saw them. The mother was on her knees on the side of the bed, sucking that boy's dick, Christopher's. Her head was between his ass and going up and down. And Skipper was watching. Willie was asleep in the chair. I crept back up the stairs. Before they left for Ohio, Augusta found a hollow point bullet on her kitchen counter. She assumed Ed Sexton was sending her a message, since she intervened for the sake of the children. Augusta, because I seen something happen in my house. I thought I was going to get killed, 'cause I'm telling the buck-naked truth. Them is some freaky motherfuckers. Excuse my English, please. Further complicating the legal proceedings, Michelle signed paperwork registering allegations that Otis Sexton both physically and sexually abused her. Ed had a unique connection with each child. He would tell each of them separately that he loved them the most. He made each one keep it a secret from the rest. There was a hierarchy among the children in terms of how much privilege or persecution came their way. Skipper had some freedom. He was permitted to join the wrestling team at school. Willie was very physically strong, but he had a stutter. Ed called him Little Dick. As Shelley put it, he was always called a wimp. And my dad was always stronger. He'd always slap him around, make him feel small, and yet Willie would do anything for him. Willie tried to run away once. He took off on his bicycle, but he didn't get far before his father tracked him down in the family's van. He jumped the curb and pinned Willie against a brick wall, resulting in the flesh on his arm being torn. Kimberly, compared to most of the others, was coddled. She received less beatings than the other children. Christopher was his mother's favorite. He was allowed to join his high school's football team. Matthew mastered the ability to avoid drawing attention to himself so as to prevent as much abuse as possible. Lana was seen as the star of the family. Ed trained her on how to pose for cameras and for public appearances. James was always the butt of jokes because he was slow. Sherry's popularity in the family waxed and waned. She was usually condemned when she refused to slow dance with her father at their weekend house dances. Estella Pixie Sexton was the oldest girl. She was her dad's eyes and ears around the house when he wasn't around. Speculation had it that Ed had sex with her the most. She was the child most often deputized into babysitting. She frequently barked orders at her siblings and reported them to her father if they disobeyed. Michelle witnessed one of the first sexual encounters Ed and Pixie engaged in on the couch. She didn't believe Pixie was the victim of rape, at least not at that time. She said Pixie was in love with her father. Michelle. She had gotten really involved. She wouldn't talk about it. It's just the way she acted, always wanting to be with him, not wanting to date anybody, then finally being interested in Joel, because she knew she could control Joe. He was very mellow. Michelle addressed some of the other bizarre rumors, which included the occult, a deviant sect of Christianity, and animal torture. Ed once killed the only pet Michelle ever owned, a rabbit. As she tells it, he made her watch as he slit its throat. After severing its head, he bolted up the stairs to torment her by showing it to her. There was a cape on his hand, as if he were putting on a morbid puppet show with the rabbit's head. She was forced to eat it when it was served to the family that night. Ed would hold candlelit seances around the dining room table. Eddie Jr. would channel his grandmother in a strange voice. Ed claimed to be a mystical figure. He spoke in tongues. He read scriptures aloud, but gave his own distorted interpretations. He claimed that some kind of mark on his hand endowed him with special powers. He would say he was both God and Satan. He would make his children look in his eyes until they saw Lucifer. He would tell them he could take their souls with him and that he knew all their thoughts. Michelle and Willie were once brought by their father to a cemetery in Canton. She was 15 and Willie was 17. Ed found a freshly dug grave. He forced Shelley to crawl into it and pull a large section of cardboard over her. Ed was testing her courage. She remained in the grave for a half hour. Meanwhile, she heard her father making strange noises. Willie was too scared to get in the grave. His father ridiculed him for days. Skipper once witnessed something that transpired between Ed and Pixie. It was dubbed the Chocolate Kisses Game. Ed played the game with May and all his daughters. Skipper. He and Pixie were eating these little cherries in chocolate with white shit inside them, like you might get your old lady on Valentine's Day. He put one in his mouth, and I thought he was going to eat it. Joel was in the living room. I was sitting right at the table, and Pixie was standing there, and he put his mouth up to her mouth, lip to lip, and passed it, like you're French kissing your old lady. That shit was sick. I got up and walked out. Lee Sexton was taken into a foster family. She was no ordinary child, as her foster family would soon understand all too well. Though typically immature, she was mature beyond her years in some areas. After all, sexual abuse has a way of robbing children of their innocence. She could be very blunt. She would make wisecracks about waitresses. She made inappropriate jokes. She treated adults as peers. Her favorite word was penis. Some examples. He's such a penis. That movie is a real penis. Don't be such a penis. When her foster mother, Tabitha, gained Lana's trust, Lana began to confide in her. She talked about Skipper. She told Tabitha he raped her. She said, "I'm afraid of him." A few nights later, she revealed that her father molested her. She said, "Daddy hurt me. I don't ever want to be with my dad." Tabitha held her close. She said, "You don't have to worry. You're with us now." Lana was distressed, saying, "No, you don't understand. You can't say anything he won't know." Tabitha reported this disclosure to social workers. A week later, Tabitha was picking Lana up from school. Lana looked terrified. She said, "I saw Skipper on the playground today." She said Skipper gave her a phone number and said the rest of the family was in Salem, West Virginia. According to Lana, Skipper said to her, "I'll be back with Dad. and you better be here. Lana reported seeing Skipper in a blue truck. Tabitha had also seen it. She reported the truck to social workers. A week later, Tabitha picked Lana up from school. Lana suddenly ducked. She screamed, "He's back there!" Tabitha checked her rearview mirror. She didn't see the blue truck, just a motorcyclist. She said, "Who's back there?" Lana said, "That's my father on that motorcycle." It proved to be a false alarm as the motorcyclist turned and rode out of sight. Once at bedtime, Lana said she believed her father knew she told secrets about the family. Lana said, "He can talk with us anywhere we are. You can't hide. He's Satan. He has special powers." April 29th. A week after Lana's encounter with Skipper on the schoolyard, Lana and the Fisher family returned to their house to find that a break-in had occurred. The door was wide open. The door handle was broken off. Lattice work on the porch had been broken. Nothing inside the house was disturbed. Lana took a look at the vandalism and said, "It's my dad. It's my dad." They spent the night at their pastor's house. Lana was taken back into the custody of DHS. Lana continued to enjoy weekend visitations with the Fishers. She showed Tabitha a line on her hand that she was told by her father was unique. She told some dark stories. Stories about beatings. A story about being made by her father to wear a transparent white dress and dance around a table that was lit with candles. Once, when Tabitha took Lana swimming, she noticed a large scar at the base of Lana's spine. She said, "That looks pretty painful. You get that from a fall or something?" Lana said, "No, my dad cut me." Lana also said that she had a twin sister who was killed by her father at birth. Lana said, crying, "That could have been me. I could be dead." Tabitha said, "How do you know that?" Lana said, "My sister told me." She wouldn't tell her which sister it was. She also said that frequently when her mother got pregnant, her father would punch her in the stomach to abort the fetus. Lana was forced by him to drink the blood that was expelled from her mother's vagina when this happened. Tabitha said, "Did you ever see the baby?" Lana said, "On a tray." Lana disclosed to Tabitha that a girl in another of the foster homes touched her inappropriately. She also told her that it wasn't just her father and brother who sexually abused her. Lana, "My mother touched me." Tabitha, "Touched you how?" Lana, "She put things in me." This disclosure was reported to DHS. There are other findings. Lana became bulimic, losing 20 pounds. Lana revealed suicidal ideation. Lana believed her father knew what she was talking about. When she stayed with Tabitha, she exhibited some other disturbing behaviors. She would play with Barbie dolls for hours on end, more than the average girl. She would be overheard talking. When Tabitha asked her who she was talking to, she said she heard voices and that she wasn't allowed to tell her to whom they belonged. She repeated her claim that her father knew where she was, knew who she was talking to, was Satan, and had powers. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. She would be defiant toward Tabitha, screaming and uttering profanities. The rest of the Sexton family moved to Florida, where they parked their trailers on land owned by relatives. While in Florida, Ed Sr. made a video in which he accused everybody involved in the investigation, including his daughter Michelle, of being a liar and infringing on his rights as an American. Ed, "Citizens of the United States, I am coming to you in hopes that in some way that some official of the United States government can step in and find out why a family such as mine has been treated in such a manner. I feel that our constitutional rights have been violated. Our civil rights have been violated. For 15 minutes, he described the charges in detail. He blamed most of his and his family's troubles on Michelle, his brother Otis, the Stark County DHS, Wayne Welsh, and Bonita Hilson. He claimed Michelle ran away from home before during the summer of her senior year. He alleged that she dumped urine from an upstairs window on her brothers, Matt and Willie. He said she's accused other people of rape, such as a boyfriend, the father of one of her friends, her uncle Otis, and a park worker she dated after leaving home. Ed accused Wayne Welsh of fabricating pregnancy test results for the Jackson PD. He said his brother Otis was motivated by money and vengeance. He claimed their relationship fell by the wayside when Otis falsely accused Ed of stealing a ring. He went on to say that Otis filed false insurance claims and a bogus disability case. He said Otis was trying to gain custody of his children so he could collect relief payments. Speaking conclusively of Otis, he said, "He is mentally ill to a great extent due to the fact that he tries to cause everybody problems." Ed made claims about his own health. "I have a mass. My left eye is out, and it's taken over my nervous system, and I've had 9 back surgeries, and I have cancer in between my shoulder blades, and evidently it's spreading." It has never been proven that he or his wife have Native American blood, but he continued to call on them to, quote-unquote, rise up and, quote-unquote, support him. Ed, my mother was Indian, my father was Indian, my wife's father was Indian, her mother was Indian. He claimed their families didn't have tribal registration numbers because they'd left their reservations at the turn of the century, a time when record-keeping stopped. He called Wayne Welsh a habitual liar. He accused the Foster families of being abusive. He called Bonita Hilson a very arrogant person. He elaborated on Hilson. "I just don't know what was wrong with her. She had no kind of inner feelings whatsoever. She's the kind of individual who is ironclad within herself. I feel that she has got a problem. I don't know what her marital status is, but I'd rest assured to state she's probably not married. I understand she has children. I don't know how many, but I figure she's had a bad time of marriage. I figure psychologically and mentally she has suffered and she has got a mental problem herself. And now anybody that has married and has children, she's going to make them suffer." Lee Sexton also weighed in. "While we were at Harmony House, she, Lana, was showing us some bruises on her arm, ones that the Foster family had put on her, because she was being rebellious. And Bonita Hilson said she couldn't let the children be rebellious, and I wanted her out of the foster home. Lana told her how they were treating her. They were wanting her to do housework. She was only 12 years old, and I don't think children like that should be treated as maids. She wasn't treated that way at home, and while Kim was in foster care, they tried to run away twice. They were locked in bathrooms with the light bulbs taken out. They were even locked in closets. The boys were being worked like farm animals in the foster homes. They were all being mistreated, and I'd like to see them back home where they belong." Ed re-entered the frame. He denied all allegations of physical and sexual abuse. He had the remaining children appear in the video, nodding like robots as he spoke. "I have to thank you in front of everybody that's going to hear this tape for the assistance you've given me through all this. I can't thank you enough for bringing me my medication. I was really supposed to be in a wheelchair. The doctors have informed my attorneys, and so forth. My lifespan isn't too long right now. Are you aware of that? He addressed this to Pixie. She nodded. She nodded for the subsequent 5 minutes as he dredged up details of his case. At one point, he addressed Pixie, saying, "What was your childhood like?" She said, "My childhood was good." She didn't say much else for the rest of the interview. The other children made appearances and all said good things about their father, while denying that anything untoward had happened in their house growing up. Ed's conclusion: I hope this gives you some insight or impression of the family and children and the conditions we are in at this time. Now I have taken my children and placed them before you. I have placed my wife before you. I have placed myself and jeopardized myself. I know you will know I have violated the law, and I admit it, but I will continue to violate the law for the protection of my family and the preservation of my family. Just as I stated before, I would gladly give my life for my country. I would gladly give my life for my family, because that is my country. Your family is your country. Your family is a country, the future of the United States. Members of the family claim that the children's and May's parts were written. Ed and May got into a fight after it was shot because he was dissatisfied with her performance. Pixie mailed the tape back up north in mid-August. September. Judge Julie Edward awarded DHS permanent custody of all minor Sexton children. Missing persons reports were filed for Kimberly, Matthew, and Christopher. Michelle later admitted that her parents forced her to accuse Otis of sexually abusing her. Meanwhile, in Florida, Ed and his kids practiced military drills. They practiced shooting guns in preparation for a standoff with police. They found a house to settle in permanently. The boys even wore military fatigues. The kids bullied Joel Good. He was the butt of jokes. They played pranks on him. Eventually, they were just beating him up. Though Pixie defended him at first, even she turned on him. She accused him of sexually abusing their children, which he did not do. They would torture and murder animals as part of satanic sacrifice rituals. When Ed wasn't around, the teenagers and young adults were smoking pot, drinking alcohol, and sniffing gasoline. They continued to torture Joel. Once they forced him to eat a live goldfish. Another time they stripped him naked and inserted a funnel into his rectum. They poured hot sauce straight into his bowel. Skipper once tried to force a broomstick up Joel's rectal cavity. Joel was hit on the head with a frying pan. He was whipped with an electrical cord. He was burned with cigarettes. He didn't fight back, so they didn't stop. Sometimes their parties became sexual. Pixie would have sex with her brother Willie sometimes. She did it with a cousin on another occasion. Sherry had sex with Skipper. Later, an attorney questioned her about this. He said, "Your father encouraged that as normal among family members, correct?" Pixie said, "He didn't know we was doing it." Meanwhile, Ed and his brood refused to seek medical attention when needed, since it was an action that would likely attract attention from the authorities. Even when baby Skipper, son of Pixie, developed an illness, they wouldn't take him to the hospital. They gave him adult-strength aspirin and NyQuil. Pixie would punish the baby by slapping him. To say they mishandled the situation would be an understatement. Eventually, baby Skipper died. Michelle met with Detective Steve Reddy. She was to reveal what her father had done for the second time. Only on this occasion, there would be no retraction. She gave the following details. Her father tried to rape her when she was 15, but found her too small to penetrate. Ed tried to force her to perform oral sex on him, but she refused. He knocked her head against a coffee table, an action that chipped her tooth. Reddy counted 3 felony counts so far. She recounted being shown by her father a bloody dead body in their car's trunk. She believed the body was of a man she knew as Uncle Towhead. The explanation she was given was that he was beaten for showing pornographic photos to Pixie. Reddy asked her about assaults her father made against her siblings, her revelations. She saw Pixie have sex with her father on the couch. She and Matt saw their father have sex with Sherry in the family's van. Reddy added 5 more counts. Reddy: did Sherry tell your mom that your dad was doing this? Michelle: no, Stella did. Reddy: Estella told her, and you told her too, right? Michelle: yes. Michelle went on to say that her mother didn't believe the allegations. Reddy questioned her about the ritualized abuse. What he knew to that point was what had been reported by Lana and James. Michelle said that her father would dress in black. She mentioned the occasion when he gathered them around a table on which laid a dead cat. He had them hold hands. He said he needed a sacrifice or whatever to make spirits come. She said he once forced all of them to drink deer's blood during a hunting expedition. They drank the blood out of his cupped hands. Reddy asked her if she had anything to report regarding dead babies. James and Lana had volunteered that information to social workers. Michelle said Sherry had a miscarriage in the house. Reddy asked, and there was a baby? Michelle said, it wasn't formed. She said it was in its 2nd trimester. Reddy asked her what happened to the fetus. She said she didn't know. She suspected the baby's ultimate fate was sealed in some kind of ceremony, but she had no details to report. She said, my dad said they had to save its soul or something like that. I don't know. I didn't stay and get involved in it. I couldn't. It was gross. Reddy asked her if she had seen any other rituals. Michelle: he married Angel. Reddy: he married Angel? Michelle: and Kim too. The girls were married to their father. They wore white gowns, and he wore a suit. It was an ad hoc wedding, as formalized as possible given their limited resources. He married them individually on separate days. Reddy: where? Michelle: he'd always say it was their honeymoon or whatever. She said he would take them into the master bedroom. Her mother went in too. Reddy asked her to testify. She agreed to do so. Baby Skipper was kept in the family's vehicle. As his body decomposed, they kept it hidden, since taking it to a morgue would attract the attention of social service administrators and advocates. Ed Sr. forbid them from talking about it to anybody. They later buried him at night in some swampland behind the mobile home park where they were staying. Joel objected to it. Ed Sr. was fed up with Joel. At one point, he said to Pixie, if he keeps this up, we're going to have to take him out. October 22nd. Eddie Jr. was at Otis Sexton's house. He agreed to be interviewed by Detective Reddy. Reddy interviewed him in his car. Reddy: Eddie, you came to me with your uncle, Otis Sexton, and wanted to talk about things that had happened to you while you were growing up in your family's household. Is that correct? Eddie: yeah. Reddy: were you ever sexually abused by your parents? Eddie: by my father. He said his father sodomized him when he was 13 or 14. He did it twice then, and another time when he was 17. He ran away after one of these incidents. Reddy asked him if it happened to his male siblings. Eddie said he likely did it to Willie. Eddie said that when his father raped him, he told him he had sex with his other brothers. Reddy asked him about his father sexually abusing his sisters. He said he saw him have sex with Pixie. He said he hid under a bed in the family van on a trip to Wales Square. He said there was another incident at the shopping area. Reddy asked him about the rituals. Ed said there was weird stuff that went on there. He said he didn't witness any of the rituals involving animal sacrifice. He did mention the seances. He confirmed everything Michelle said about Uncle Towhead, though he said he hadn't seen the body. Reddy asked him if he would be willing to testify against his father in front of a grand jury. Eddie said he would. October 25th. Eddie Jr., Michelle, Lana, and James were confirmed as witnesses for the prosecution and would testify during a trial. Ed Sr. would be charged with 4 counts of rape and 4 counts of sexual imposition. May was indicted on charges of gross sexual imposition and the endangering of a child. This was based on Lana's statements about being fondled by May. The FBI took on the case. They were utilizing every trick in the book to find Eddie Lee Sexton and his complicit wife, May. May, stupid as always, called FBI agent Randy Howell when he requested a call from her. She called him on November 8th. He asked her where they were staying. She simply said, down south. When asked if Ed was with her, she said, off and on. Howell asked her if they would surrender. She said she would have to check with Ed. Her stupidity helped enable Ed to abuse the children, but it was because she was such a moron that she called the FBI. She must not have realized that the FBI can easily trace phone calls to their location. FBI offices across the country were notified that Eddie Lee Sexton and his wife were fugitives. The information was disseminated as widely as Indianapolis, Oklahoma, Knoxville, Louisville, Minneapolis, Newark, and Tampa. Agents were to contact every person the Sextons contacted via telephone. This bulletin was issued to agents ahead of their possible contact with Eddie Lee Sexton. Eddie L. Sexton is to be considered armed and dangerous with suicidal tendencies. May later recalled what it was like to deal with Ed during this time. I didn't hear the baby crying because every night I was getting knocked out with something. I didn't really know what was going on that night. Eddie wanted to be the doting husband and always wanted to fix my plate, and he didn't want anybody to eat what I was eating. And it seemed like about a half hour or so after I'd eaten, I'd be out. I'd wake up in the morning half here and half there. He was drugging me. Oh, and he was real hateful. He was going every 2 weeks for the checks. And it seemed like every time he would come back from Canton, it would be worse than when he left. He was in a good mood when he left, and he'd say he'd be back the following day, real fast. But when he came back, he'd always find something wrong, like I did something wrong, or the kids did something wrong. His look always scared me. I mean, his eyes were always real bloodshot. I didn't know if it was from the lack of sleep, or the medication, or if he'd been drinking, or what it was. Sometimes I'd get smacked, sometimes I wouldn't. Then I'd just get tired of it and smack him back. I'd take a walk. I just wanted to do anything to get out of there. Now I called the FBI because I wanted Eddie to turn himself in. I talked to the FBI man. He was trying to make arrangements to set up a court date. Eddie was supposed to turn himself in, and they were supposed to drop the charges against me. I didn't know what kind of charges they were, and the FBI man said they would drop the charges against me and I could go to court and get my children. I said, all right. I told Eddie. The next thing I know, he's saying, oh, they're just tricking us. I said, why do you have me call and set these dates up if you're just going to make an ass out of me and get the authorities mad? It was my idea to start with, because I wanted to get out of this situation because it was getting so hot and heated. I thought, Something is going to happen to one of these kids. Eddie had a plan on how to deal with the FBI, or, quote-unquote, those stupid sons of bitches, as he called them. Should they have tracked him down, he knew what to do, and he wouldn't do it alone. Eddie would fire at the agents. Willie would start the camper and plow through the line of agents. Christopher would retaliate against agent fire from the back window of the camper. If all that were not feasible, they would retreat into the woods. They practiced doing this in the forest. They would find places to escape or hide. Eddie didn't do anything by half measures. He trained the boys on how to operate a firearm. He taught them knife throwing. He instructed them in basic hand-to-hand combat. He showed them how to strangle someone with a garrote. Ed Sr. was suspected of killing Joel Good. Joel tried to leave the family and return up north. He was about to pay for a bus ticket when Ed Sr. approached him and grabbed him by the throat. Joel hadn't been seen since. One night Otis received a call from a neighbor. They said, "There's a car full of people watching your house." Otis turned out all the lights in the house. He went upstairs and looked out the window. When he pushed aside a curtain, the car sped off. Skipper Sexton commented on this incident later. He said that he, Willie, and their father were in the car. Skipper: "We were just going to wait until he came out and blow his ass away, then torch the house. We sat there for about 2.5 hours, and we seen the curtain come open in the top window, and I think it was him that looked out. We jetted." Their next stop was the house where Eddie Jr. was staying. Skipper: "My old man had me against Eddie Bug so bad. I walked up with the 9mm stuffed in my pants, knocking on his door, my hand behind my back. And if he would have come to the door, I would have just blown him away. I'm glad he wasn't there. My dad had me against my own blood." Ed decided that he and his clan had been living in one place too long. He also felt they needed new identities. Their new surname would be Wise. December. Agent Randy Howell received a call from Lee Sexton. She said she and her husband were surrendering. They gave a date of December 21st at 11 p.m. They would appear at the FBI office in Canton, Ohio. Steve Reddy went to the office at the appointed time. So did Randy Howell. May called to say they'd run into inclement weather. Reddy said, "She's full of shit." He consulted the Weather Bureau. The skies had cleared on I-75, where she said they were driving. Orville Sexton called Randy to tell him that Ed called him long distance twice, and that he still had the phone bill bearing the record. One call was traced to Little Manatee Mobile Home Park, where the family had been staying. Meanwhile, another camper, Raymond Hesser, had been a little too forthcoming with Ed and his brood. They were prepared to rob him blind. Hesser was disabled, but they intended to bind him with handcuffs. Ray would be forced at gunpoint to write checks to Willie, Pixie, Skipper, and Sherry. They would drain him of all his funds. Ed planned to finish by killing Hesser. As Ed put it, "We're going to pull it down. Today, I'm going to take Ray out." Park Ranger Yale Hubbard was working in tandem with the FBI, who were setting up surveillance. They parked a surveillance van nearby. It's a testament to how ruthless the Sexton clan were when it came to snitches. Two of these Sexton boys walked up to the unfamiliar vehicle and tried the door. It was locked. Hubbard was worried about Raymond Hesser. The Sextons had been visiting him on the regular. Pixie was seductive toward him, leading to Hubbard and a long-term camper to joke with Hesser about Pixie being his girlfriend. Hubbard advised Hesser to be careful and not be too trusting with the Sexton clan. Hessler said he was taken aback by how nosy the Sextons were. He said they followed him to the camp's payphone when he had funds electronically transferred. He said he suspected they were trying to memorize his PIN number. Hubbard said, "Ray, just be careful." January 14th, 1:36 p.m. The Sextons pulled into the Winn-Dixie grocery store parking lot. Eddie, Lee, and May got out. Then the kids. Completely unexpected, there were men in camouflage clothing lying face down on the pavement. They were pointing guns at the Sextons' heads. They shouted, "FBI! Go ahead, move, and you're dead." Steve Reddy interviewed Michelle about her sexual abuse experiences. This time, she was prepared to tell the truth. She said it started when she was 13 years old. She said, "It hurt. He told me he was going to make a woman out of me." He raped her 5 times from 1985 to 1991. Her father got her pregnant, though the baby was a miscarriage. She agreed to give a blood sample with Christopher to verify Ed Sr.'s record of inbreeding. Concerned that Joel Good would inform on the family, they murdered him. They cut him into several pieces and buried the parts in different spots. Pixie was interviewed. She said that everybody in their house was afraid of her father. She said, "He controls everything." She told a story about the first time he raped her. She was sitting on the couch one night when he came out of his bedroom wearing only his underpants. The rest of the family were asleep. He said to her, "Do you know how babies are made?" She said, "Yes." He said, "I want to have some." He raped his daughter immediately after. She didn't comply initially. She struggled. He held his hand over her mouth as she began to cry out. He also raped her behind Wells Square. He began approaching her for sex on a regular basis. The typical protocol was he would hold his hand over her mouth and penetrate her while the rest of the family was asleep. Distressed by it all, she approached her mother in hopes that her mother would protect her child from a monster who raped her, even if it was the child's father and her husband. May's response? She said, "You're crazy." Pixie confirmed that Dawn and Shasta were sired by her father. She was asked why her father wanted to have sex with her. She said it was to have more children. When asked why she didn't practice birth control, she said her father didn't believe in it. Among the many items in evidence were some lingerie. Sherry and Skipper said they were worn by 9-year-old Kimberly. Some photographs were submitted. There were 3 of Eddie Lee Sexton and his daughter Kimberly. He posed in another with Lana. The girls were wearing wedding veils and sheer lace skirts. Eddie was posing with the girls as if he were taking their hands in marriage. It made sense in his world. Eddie married all his daughters. The honeymoons were in the bedroom. February 21st. Doctors revealed their findings. Dawn and Shasta had both been sodomized. They had also been vaginally penetrated. The children experienced problems with rectal incontinence, which is a symptom frequently observed in children who have been raped anally. Dawn reported that Skipper, Willie, and Grandpa Eddie, as she referred to him, were responsible. Willie revealed that his father had been sodomizing him since he was 9 years old. He did it to him 3 times in 3 different states while they were on the run. Kimberly intimated that Skipper fondled her. Skipper denied that he did this, but he admitted that he touched Kimberly's vagina. May Sexton's sister disclosed that Eddie raped her sister and another of his relatives. The sister was impregnated by him. The child was 14 years old at the time of his arrest. The sister left Ohio and went into hiding because she feared that if she cooperated with police, Eddie or one of his children would retaliate. Sherry Sexton delved into her history of being sexually abused. Not only was she raped by her father, but other relatives. She was fondled at 9 years old. Later, she was raped by her deceased uncle Joe Sexton and one of her cousins. She told her parents, but all they did was yell at her. Once, when her father's brother Dave came to visit and asked her to clean his trailer, she did it. Dave asked her for sex, but she refused. He pushed her down to the floor. He pulled off her shorts and yanked her panties down and raped her. Incest seemingly grew out of every branch of the family tree. Her uncle Dave raped his daughter, and she bore his child. When asked about what she wanted to be done to her father, she said, "I'd like him punished for what he did." It was Steve Reddy who interviewed her. He filed a detailed police report. He talked to her again later, only this time she had had a talk with her mother. Now she said to him, "I've decided I don't want nothing done." Pixie Good was remanded at Hillsborough County Jail. She was in rough shape. She had a complete mental breakdown. She was on antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs. She had ulcers. She was put on an IV because she wasn't eating or drinking. She began to cut herself, leading to staff placing her in restraints. She was tortured by symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. She experienced auditory hallucinations. It was her father's voice she heard. She slept a maximum of 4 hours a night. She had nightmares and flashbacks, taking her back to the moments the abuse occurred. A 2-day trial for Mae Sexton took place in Ohio. Her attorney wanted her child-raping incestuous husband to testify on her behalf. Clearly, this lawyer was asleep in law school when she was taught about credible witnesses. She also wanted 2 of Mae's children to testify. The state refused to fly them up for the trial. Social workers Benita Hilson and Tracy Harlan detailed the DHS's difficulties with the Klan. They described the symptoms of mental illness that Lana demonstrated. James Sexton Jr. testified. He may have been his father's namesake, but this apple couldn't have fallen further from the tree. He relished the opportunity to exact revenge against his twisted parents. He talked about his father's bullshit, referring to the family being so-called futuretrons, the mark on Lana's hand, a $2.5 million advertising campaign opportunity that he claimed Burger King offered to him. He said he once witnessed Lana getting whipped for failing to smile at the dinner table. He mentioned more of the physical abuse. He described his father's occult practices. Gene Madden, Mae's lawyer and incompetent piece of shit, cross-examined James Jr. Madden: "Do you feel you were picked on?" James: "Picked on?" Madden: "Yes." James: "Sexually molested, abused, beaten." Madden attempted to cast doubt on the occult stories. Madden: "Now, you saw devils floating around the house?" James: "Yes, I actually seen them." Madden: "Mm-hmm." James: "And my dad was the leader of it." Madden: "Your father threatened you if you told anybody about that?" James: "Yes. One time he had a baby sitting in the middle of the table, all cut up and baked." Madden: "Where did he get the baby?" James: "My mom had her." Madden: "When?" James: "I'll say in 87. He explained that his mother had several babies that disappeared soon after birth. After a recess, Lana took the stand. She was questioned by Assistant Prosecutor Christine Rohrer. After confirming all the details that were explored with James, Lana said she didn't want her mother to be punished. She just wanted her to get counseling. Rohrer questioned Lana about the felony charge, an incident that took place when Lana was 8 years old. Rohrer: did anything besides being whipped with a belt happen that made you uncomfortable with your mom? Lana: yes. She said it happened in her parents' bedroom. Lana: Sometimes us kids would take a shower in the bathroom by her bedroom, and I was drying off from my shower, and she called me in there. Rohrer: what did she say? Lana: she told me to sit on the bed. Rohrer: and then what happened? Lana: she would feel me in the wrong parts. Rohrer asked her to be specific. Lana: private parts. Rohrer: which private parts are you talking about? Lana: your front private parts. Rohrer: front private parts on the top, front private parts on the bottom? Lana: on the bottom. She started to rub me. Lana said she went to bed crying after being fondled for a couple of seconds. Mae Sexton's attorney argued that the prosecution failed to prove their case. It was good enough for the jury. They returned with a guilty verdict after 2 hours of deliberation. Skipper Sexton was in the courtroom. He said, "This is bullshit. I know she's innocent." He insisted they went after the wrong parent. At her sentencing hearing, Mae Sexton made this statement to the judge: "I would like to maintain my innocence, and I'd just like to get it straightened out, and then I'll accept anything the court wants to give me." The judge told her she had violated a parent's prime responsibility. Judge: you have to protect them, take care of them. The maximum sentence under the law for her crimes was 2 years in prison, and that was the sentence he gave her. Meanwhile, blood test DNA results proved that Eddie Lee Sexton was the father of Dawn and Shasta Sexton. The lab reported these findings as fixing the percentage of paternal probability at 99.99%. The Canton Fire Department submitted reports that indicated the Sexton family burned all their houses. He did it to commit insurance fraud. Skipper told a bizarre story about how their father accused a couple of his sons of putting Ben Gay on one of their sister's jackets. He put Ben Gay on each boy's penis. Christopher found it hard to talk about the abuse. He said his father hadn't, quote-unquote, messed with me since I was a teenager. By this he meant that Eddie touched his pubic area and his backside. Michelle related a story about Eddie, quote-unquote, calling a spirit by attempting to draw it out of Sherry's dead cat on the table. She also mentioned Mae's many induced miscarriages. She said that on one occasion her mother threw it in a pot and boiled it. It was served to the family for dinner. James mentioned that his father did not allow any of his kids to bathe more frequently than once every 1 or 2 weeks. They were not allowed to use deodorant. James mentioned more of Eddie's deviant behavior. He cast satanic spells on the children, wherein he used a satanic Bible and prayed in strange foreign words. He had a library of occult literature. He owned a crystal ball and a Ouija board. He had what he referred to as a quote-unquote romance shelf. It contained pornography. Eddie Lee Sexton showed hardcore porn videos to his children. He said that they ate many of Mae's miscarried fetuses for dinner. Eddie once killed a cat, chopped its head off, and hung it on a cross. James explained the possible consequences for not obeying his father. If I didn't do what Dad wanted me to do, he would tell the kids that he would kill us and make us sleep with the dead baby. James was asked what the baby tasted like. He said it tasted like chicken. He cannot eat chicken to this day. He listed some of the sexual acts to which he was forced to engage. He was forced to perform oral sex on Ed when he was 6 years old. His father drew a face on his stomach and made him suck his belly. James, Matthew, and Skipper were forced to perform oral sex on one another. James was sodomized repeatedly by Skipper. Ed told the boys he would give them each $1 if they sucked on their mother's breasts. Ed made James shake his penis until, quote, stuff came out, unquote. James once observed as Skipper forced Lana to suck on his penis. Speaking of all this, Ed Sr. said, "It's all within the law. It's natural." Eddie Lee Sexton Sr.'s trial began. Pixie testified. She said she heard her parents talking about killing Joel Good. None of the attorneys had heard it before. She said, "He said that he wants to get rid of Joel because he knows too much." The judge allowed all statements made by the witnesses to be entered into the record. Pixie confirmed that Dawn and Shasta were fathered by her father. However, she denied many of the claims she had made in earlier depositions, frustrating to all those involved who wanted to prosecute Eddie Lee Sexton. It happened with his other children as well. They discredited themselves. Even the jurors said later that they found it difficult to believe the Sexton children. Eddie Lee did not take the stand. Prosecuting attorney Jay Pruner made his argument. "I would gladly die for my country because my family is my country." Those are the words of Eddie Sexton captured on the videotape that he created for President Clinton. And no truer words were ever spoken by Eddie Lee Sexton, because he ran his family as a dictator would a country. He wasn't a benevolent dictator either. Much as the forefathers of our country blew holes into the mountains for transportation for the train system, Eddie Lee Sexton dynamited the bedrock of the personality and the will of his children through the incessant bombardment of abuse. Why? To preserve the national security, the security of the family, to preserve the national secrets, the family secrets, the secrets that he spoke to his children, the daughters who then became his wives. I suppose if he were on trial for all the other things we've heard about, being a dictator, sexual abuse, and on and on and on, and being the worst father of the century, I would tell each of you, yeah, the state's proven its case. But Mr. Sexton stands trial for his life for a crime he did not commit. He stands trial for first-degree murder. The murder in question was, of course, that of Joel Good. Ed's children gave conflicting accounts on how it came about, which threw a monkey wrench into the endeavor of putting Ed Sexton behind bars with a life sentence. Jay Pruner continued regarding the murder of Joel Good. Pixie Good had her husband tortured. She tortured him. And when he was speaking his last words, because she loved him so much, he didn't call for her. He didn't call for Willie. He didn't call for Skipper. He called for the man sitting at the table right there, Eddie. He called for Eddie, the man who hated him. If you believe Pixie Good, that's who he called for in his last-ditch attempt to stay alive. Joel Good yelled for Ed. Does that surprise you? Who ran things? Who was the arbiter? Who was the one who had physical domination and control? Some more bizarre details about Ed Sexton's parenting approach emerged. Michelle and Matt recalled stealing a chocolate bar from the master bedroom and being punished by being locked in their rooms without food for 3 days. Food from the locked refrigerator was only given to the children who were looked upon as favorites at the time. One time when the boys brought back original recipe chicken from KFC instead of the extra crispy, They were forced to eat nothing but chicken for days. They were locked in closets for wetting themselves when they were children. They were beaten when they were let out the following day. The Christmas tree was taken up and down throughout the holiday season, with Christmas canceled before it actually happened. One year Ed threw it across the room. Ed would run around the house naked, clad only in an American flag. Ed would tell everyone he had an 11-inch penis. Bearing this in mind, he gave himself the nickname of Super Dick. Ed exposed himself to the children every day. Ed once dispatched Patrick to buy condoms and so-called hard-on cream, which was a numbing agent to prevent premature ejaculation. Ed had an inflatable sex doll. Girls were to report to the master bedroom for so-called private talks. This would often consist of him raping them with the hard-on cream. Ed would sometimes rape the children with a handheld dildo or strap-on. Both Ed and May would shave the girls' pubic hair. Ed and May showed the children how to have sex with each other. Sometimes Ed would get May to assist him as he raped one of the children, deputizing her in the role of holding the child down for him. He often raped the children in the presence of May, who would laugh if one of the children asked for relief. Ed and May would make fun of Michelle because she was not as physically developed as her sisters. The identities and roles of every member of the household were listed. Eddie was the patriarch. Pixie was Eddie's lieutenant, watching everybody for him. Skipper was Ed's sergeant, the enforcer of the rules. Willie was Ed's muscle. Lana was the mystical figure. Christopher was the most loved. James was the runt. Michelle was the outcast. Kimberly was the innocent mascot. Matt, the quiet one. Sherry was nothing but a victim. Attorney Judy Jeniton had this to say about May Sexton. She's worse than him. She's such a liar. She knew all this was going on. She participated in it. She was part of it. She tried to latch on to this battered woman thing, and that's just crap. She was no battered woman. She was part of the plan. The jury's deliberations lasted 2 hours and 35 minutes. Eddie Lee Sexton was convicted. The next day, the jury met for another 2 hours after Eddie Sexton's character witnesses gave their testimonies. Eddie Lee Sexton was given the death penalty. He also received a conspiracy to murder charge, which would necessitate a prison sentence of 15 years. Estella Sexton Good was sentenced to 6 years in prison for the murder of Joel Good. In an interview with a reporter from the St. Petersburg Times, Ed Sexton said, "I know what Christ felt on the cross. He was condemned to death for something he never done." We all know where human monsters like Eddie Lee Sexton go if the Bible is any kind of authority. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.